Hi, in this video we'll go over how to make telio crowns using CEREC. We'll start with administration and picking the teeth we're going to prep. In this case, we're doing tooth number 12 and 31. Even though we know that we're going to make telio crowns, I like to select the material of the final restoration in my case details until we get to the manufacturing stage. So I'm going to leave it here as MTL zirconia for both of them. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead and move on to the acquisition stage. If you're prepping just one tooth, it's normal to scan just the quadrant you're prepping. However, in this case, we're prepping two teeth on either side of the arch and on both arches. So a full arch scan is warranted in this case. You want to make sure you have 100% of your preparation and the adjacent proximal contacts. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and click the Model tab and move on to marking your margin. If your margin is clear, usually the software will be pretty good at identifying it. However, sometimes it's important to edit the margins yourself. To do that, you're going to zoom in and identify the area you need to correct, double-click on the last correct area of the margin, and then using a single click, you can extend that line until you reach the next correct area of the margin and double-click to correct it. Alternatively, you could also delete the margin and manually mark it yourself. To do that, I use the magnetic tool. I start by clicking on the edge of the margin, and then I keep my cursor within the margin, and the magnetic tool automatically lets the margin fall to the edge. I might need to click on multiple areas on the edges along the line until I meet up with my initial dot and double-click again. I can then inspect my margin and correct any areas using the same technique described previously. When you're satisfied, go ahead and click the Design button. We are using a generic copy of the crown here. It's usually not necessary to do a copy and mirror or a biocopy unless the patient has an existing occlusal device or a partial denture that they'd like to wear after the crown is made. At this stage, I check my crown for any minimum thickness errors. If so, I might need to go back, re-prep, and scan again. An area commonly adjusted is the gingival embrasure. This is common in patients that have a big prominent gingival embrasure, as is the case here in this typodont. We will need to modify that gingival red spot. Usually, this is a contact with soft tissue. However, in this case, it actually contacts the tooth, which will make it very hard for the crown to be seated because nothing is supposed to be wider than the proximal contact area. I'm going to go ahead and use the Shape tool and gently push that area away. You might need to change the size of your effect radius and gently push it in until there's no more red markings. You might need to turn off the lower model and go back in and make sure everything is green. It is sometimes advised to leave an island of yellow in order to be able to adjust it intraorally. Looking at it again, you can see that there's still a thick area beneath the contact. We're going to go ahead and continue to modify this area using the Shape tool. Again, you want to make sure that the proximal contact area is the widest area interproximally. After you do that, it's not uncommon for me to choose the Smooth tool to make sure everything's nice and smooth and there aren't any unusual divots in the interproximal area. I will also use the Shape tool to correct any minimum thickness errors that I detect. Here we see some on the lingual. You can thicken those areas up to make sure the material is thick enough. Once we are happy with the crown design, we can then move on to the number 12. To do that, we're going to click on the number 12 icon on the bottom left of the screen. We will be fixing a lot of the similar issues we fixed in the number 31, including the proximal contact issue, as well as the lingual minimum thickness issue. However, in this case, because it is in the aesthetic zone, we will be doing something additional. We want to make sure that the occlusal height and the cusp tip matches the progression from the canine to the posterior teeth. Normally, a first premolar would not be longer than the canine. So we'll go ahead and modify that shape to make it more aesthetic. We'll use a combination of the anatomical and circular shape tools to make the cusp tip align with the progression of the cusps from the canine to the molars. We also want to make sure that our occlusal contacts have not been affected. Once all modifications have been completed, we can go ahead and click the Manufacture tab on the top right, and that'll take us to the manufacturing page. It's important to note that up until now we've been making crowns for MTL zirconia. However, we're doing telio. To correct that, we're going to go ahead and move back to the administration page all the way on the top left. This page, we're going to go ahead and edit the case details by clicking the pen icon and changing the material from Dentsply Sirona MTL Zirconia to Ivoclar Telio CAD. We'll press OK and repeat the same thing for the number 31 crown. We won't be able to go straight to manufacturing. However, once we click OK, we can click the Design button. In here, you'll notice that there's a large minimum thickness show-through that shows up on the occlusal surface. This is because telio requires a bigger thickness to reach its maximum strength. However, this is considered a temporary, as the final restoration is going to be made out of zirconia, and it's rational to keep the minimum thickness adequate for the final restoration and not the temporary. We're going to go ahead and move on to manufacturing. In this page, we're going to make sure that the mill is that of a wet mill, adequate for telio. We're also going to make sure that the sprues that are needed to hold the crown in place while milling are not in an interproximal contact. To do that, we're going to click the Tools button and slightly shift the sprues so that they're out of the way of the interproximal contact areas. At this stage, we can go ahead and send that to the mill and start milling, or export it for milling in an external mill. We'll go over both of these in a separate video. Thank you.